Hello, everyone. Today we'll continue talking about Kant and staying hopeful. In fact, we'll be talking a little bit about dinner parties and how to do it well, how to have a good dinner party. So let us begin. I chose to discuss a little bit the dinner parties, partly because most of the topics we've discussed on Kant have been large topics. What is the nature of morality? What is the nature of freedom? Human nature, ability to know ourselves. Pretty big topics, which are all fascinating, and Kant has very interesting answers to all of those questions. But I wanted to talk about something very, very minor, very specific at dinner party, partly to illustrate that the big picture has implications for like everything one does, right? So big pictures about the nature of the good life imply how to behave in very, very specific context, right? So the big picture implies things about, say, how to have a better dinner party than otherwise. So that's one reason. But then the opposite is also true. If we look at particular things like dinner parties or something else very small, the way of answering the question how to have a better dinner party than otherwise, it's also embedded in a large picture about the good life. So a good point about talking about minor things like dinner parties is to illustrate that the answers to minor questions that how to have a better version of say dinner parties are themselves embedded in the larger story about the good life. So these big questions versus small questions are intertwined in the larger picture, and they make sense relative to each other. So anyway, so Kant was very strict about what was a good party, and arguably there are all sorts of parties that come in all sorts of shapes, and one makes them good or bad versions of party depends on the specific type of event that the party is. But anyway, there's a particular kind of party that Kant cared about. He thought it was very important, and he had a lot of rules about how to do it well, how to have the party well. And he thought that those particular kind of 18th century gatherings of, upper class people had to have two primary goals. One was intellectual stimulation, and intellectual stimulation leads to self improvement. And Kant thought that it was important for humans to take responsibility for their own personal growth, including moral, artistic, and intellectual growth. So, in fact, he thought that we had the obligation to improve morally. So, parties are occasions for the for intellectual stimulations for the possibility of personal growth. And because they're in the context of a group, there are also occasions for cultivating fellow feeling, and that is a kind of solidarity between people, the kind of ingredients out of which true friendships can emerge. So good parties have those two goals. In some sense, they make you become a better version of yourself, and they allow you to bond with other people to create good, loving relationships. Thanks, Kant. And here are some of the other kind of general things he says that seem relevant to perhaps all parties, but it's especially the smaller kind of parties that you might gather in your house. So party goers should be heard, feel included, and learn something valuable. There should be something that is going on. And perhaps you might think, well, learning something valuable, like that's only up at some very specific parties. Most parties are a way of not learning anything, it's just having fun. And that's just a very different kind of party. But arguably the should be heard and feel included, feel a sense of belong. That should be in every party. A good making feature of every party is that the party goers, the people that are invited, feel included and heard and are can participate in the activities. Arguably, that applies to all kinds of parties. Um, so here's something interesting that Kant said that I want to highlight as well. He said it's a good making feature of parties that there aren't any competitive games. And I myself have noticed when I go to different parties that when they do have competitive games, this is the kind of thing that tends to happen. There's this increase in competition. People start seeing each other as enemies in different kinds of ways. Like it promotes a kind of self-interest and self-directedness that might, on the whole, instead of promoting fellow, feeling and solidarity, might detract from it, or at least might create like different subgroups that fight against each other. And if it all stays kind of lighthearted, it might not be a big deal. But I mean, Kant has a point, right? Those can go against the having of competitive games in those party settings, can go against goal number B, which is one of the primary goals, namely to create fellow feelings and solidarity in friendship. And here's also another pretty cool observation that Kant makes. So drinks, alcohol should be available. So hey, people enjoy themselves better when they drink some alcohol. That seems right. But Kant said, but there's a right amount. If you drink very little, that doesn't really affect your mood. It's like really drinking nothing. But if you drink too much, it's like getting drunk. You act foolish, and you start making a fool out of yourself, and you make horrible decisions, and like the party just becomes recipe for self-destruction. And of course, that is very contrary to anything good. So the ideal amount of alcohol drink is enough to make you have a good time, to enjoy yourself, to change your mood for the lighter kind of way of experiencing, but not too much or too little. But anyway, so these observations about dinner parties, they're relatively minor. The point of making them out is to illustrate that there are factors that make you might have realized that there are factors that can go into identifying a good versus a bad party, and they need not be reducible to how much fun you had. Though, of course, fun is like perhaps the main ingredient in the party. So none of these should be sacrificed. Fun should not be sacrificed for the sake of these other things. I take it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a party. It would be something else. For it to be a party, it has to be enjoyable. It has to be fun, but it has to have solid. Well, it could also have solidarity and intellectual stimulation and things like that. And those themselves will be part of what makes a party a good party. But anyway, that's a pretty small topic. The real topic, the main topic, is hope. That's the big one. And Kant has a lot of fascinating things to say about hope in the way hope fits with, say, his conception of morality and freedom. He has pretty grand conclusions. So Storr begins the discussion on hope with a description of cynics. Storr herself does not define what it is to be a cynic, but a general definition is something like the following: to be a cynic is to think that humans are a mess, that humans are pretty horrible in many different ways, and furthermore, it is to believe that there is no real possibility of moral progress. Right? A cynic is someone who has both of these views. Humans are a mess, and we're always going to be a mess. Right? That's what it is to be a cynic. And I do want to point out something very annoying about cynics. So cynics tend to say, "I'm just being a realist. You are being an idealist if you disagree with me," and that's cheating, right? To One can think like the cynic that humans are a mess, but the way of going about arguing for this conclusion is by pointing to the evidence, and there's plenty of evidence out there that we're a mess. And that's the reasonable way of engaging with an interlocutor, to say, "Oh, look at this evidence." To call them naive idealist is just calling names, right? That's not a legitimate move. But anyway, so cynics can be annoying. But anyway, let's not deal with the annoying element of the cynics, but rather their view about human nature. Are they correct? And Kant himself thinks that they are correct in their assessment of humanity being a mess. So cynics are mistaken, says Kant. We shouldn't be cynics, but not, Kant thinks, because cynics like misdiagnose the state of humanity. Kant thinks that in general, cynics tend to be closer when it comes to their understanding of how bad humans are than, say, more optimistic people. So we're a big mess. We make horrible decisions. We humans, we're in trouble. Thinks Kant. The cynics are actually closer when it comes to the description of humanity. But the reason we shouldn't be cynics, Kant thinks, is because cynics lose hope in humanity, and in particular, hope in moral progress. And that can lead to despair and all sorts of bad things, and it undermines the very project of being moral and so on. So Kant thinks being cynic is a serious trap in the process of trying to be human and doing well and living rationally. So don't be a cynic, even though the cynics have a more or less accurate assessment of the way I think the world is, and the world's a big mess. Huh. So why not be a cynic? Well, Kant thinks that you shouldn't be a cynic, partly because morality itself requires hope. To enter the cynic path is, in a sense, to give up on morality, is to be immoral in some sense. Though his arguments here are strange, they don't exactly depend upon or presuppose the rest of the story we've been paying out. They're additional. They're additional elements that can be divorced from the rest of the story. And a lot of Kantians have divorced these elements from Kant's story. But it matters for us to see it so we get a better picture of Kant himself. And here's one of the claims Kant makes. So far, this is just a description, right? So it doesn't, it's not controversial. So he describes something as the highest good. He says, here's the state of affairs, and let's call it the highest good. The highest good is when humans, and perhaps all humans, But humans attain perfect virtue. They're perfectly virtuous, no vice at all, and they're also perfectly happy. So the goals that individuals have are those that are compatible with the moral law, and then they do attain those goals. That's why they're happy, and they're perfectly virtuous. They act within the bounds of the moral law. So a highest good, an ideal society, is one in which both of those elements align. Perfect virtue with perfect happiness. And of course, that's great, right? So let's just call the highest good that great, well, optimum kind of like a state of affairs of a society in which people have both of these things. So far, that's just a definition, right? That's just a description of what it is for something to be the highest good. Here is the main claim. Here's the grand claim that Kant makes that a lot of people are gonna not accept. But anyway, the big claim is that Kant thinks morality itself requires that we believe the highest good is a real possibility. And Kant thinks that morality requires that because morality requires of us to help people be happy, right? So benevolence is a virtue, so morality requires that we make people happy. And also, morality requires self-improvement. In fact, Kant says self-improvement to just unending self-improvement, right? So self-improvement that leads to full perfection, moral perfection. Morality requires that. So if morality requires that we improve ourselves to the point of perfection, and morality requires that we help others, though not by obtaining immoral means, right? Only moral means. So morality requires that we help others attain their perfect happiness, the happiness that is bound with virtue. Kant thinks, well, if morality requires both of those things, morality couldn't require the impossible. So the thing that we're required to do that leads ultimately to the perfect state of affairs, that must be possible. So morality requires for us to hope that the highest good can, at least in principle, be attained. So Kant thinks that the requirements of morality lead inexorably to the description of the highest good, and that we must strive. The moral people strive to bring about the highest good. So, but morality wouldn't ask for us to do something that is impossible. So, morality itself requires that we hope that that highest good is possible. That's Kant thinking. And it gets even grander than that. Kant thinks, but wait a minute, highest good seems humanly unattainable, right? That he thinks the cynics are to some extent right. Like, we're a mess. How can we strive to attain something that seems unattainable? Well, he thinks, well, we can't, but God can. So Kant thinks that this hope and morality extends to God, right? So it's not that we have rational proof for God's existence, but we have this kind of practical assurance that God exists, or put differently, morality requires that we believe God exists and that God will be the one that ultimately brings about the highest good. We are morally obliged to strive to bring about the highest good, but it's impossible for us humans by ourselves. But if God is in the picture, things can happen, and things can happen by, say, there being an immortal soul that survives after death, and the afterlife, heaven would be the highest good, and only God can ensure the existence of that heaven. So hope in God is required for the highest good to be possible, and morality requires the hope for the highest good. Therefore, morality requires hope in God. That's Kant. So anyway, here's what I just said. Morality requires us to believe the highest good. The highest good is attainable if God exists, because it's only in the afterlife that the highest goods can be attained. Therefore, morality requires that we hope God exists. That's what Kant thinks. Hope extends to believing in the immortality of the soul, the existence of God, in heaven. And here you see a lot of the Kantian's Christian, and he was a devout Christian. You see how his Christian beliefs kind of infiltrated his way of thinking. But this is straightforwardly not an appeal to faith, right? It's supposed to be an appeal to the integrity of the moral command and the conditions that make that integrity intelligible. So Kantian subsequent Kantian thinkers have said, well, maybe we don't have to go all the way to otherworldly goods like God and immortality, but there is a sense in which morality does require a kind of hope. And one of those is one of the Kantians has referred to this as this worldly hopes. So again, otherworldly hopes are the ones that Kant himself put forth. Morality requires that we hope God exists in the immortality of the soul and the existence of heaven for the attainment of the highest good. But Kantians have pointed out, well, it seems that we can also have, and perhaps also should have, these worldly hopes. What are these worldly hopes? Well, there's things like the hope in the possibility of moral progress, both individually and as an entire community. So perhaps morality requires that we hope that society gets better, even though we look around and things are a mess, and they've been a mess for a while. To be cynic is to abandon the commands of morality in some sense. So we should hope that society can be better, and we should hope that we ourselves can be better. When we do some self-assessment, we realize we make mistakes all the time, and that might lead to despair. Despair is contrary to morality. Hope is what morality demands. Huh, it seems. So there's this category of faith in humanity that we've discussed a little bit, but now the faith in humanity is going to play a dominant role. So faith in humanity is going to involve having this worldly hopes. And a great exemplar of this is Martin Luther King Jr., right? In one of his famous speeches, he talked about the arc of history. He said the arc of history is bent, and it's bent towards justice, and that's supposed to provide a kind of solace to the oppressed, and supposed to a kind of hope. And if you look at the history of humanity, we're a mess, but there is this. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. is not making it up, right? It was rougher. The farther back in time you go, the rougher society was, the more unjust it was. Right? Like if you go far back, the past was worse, morally speaking. We're still a mess, but we're better off than we were, by many standards. So perhaps justice is indeed somehow the goal or end of human progress. And the point here is that Kantian thinkers have thought that faith in humanity requires having this kind of hope. So let's spell out this kind of like faith in humanity, this hope in moral progress. What does that mean? Well, one of the basic elements of faith in humanity is the hope in progress. First, what are the reasons for thinking that why should we have faith in humanity and hope in moral progress? And Kant thinks having this hope, having this faith makes us virtuous. It is virtuous. It is virtuous people that have hope in others and hope in themselves. So it is itself kind of a condition for personal improvement. If you despair about the prospects of your own moral progress, or despair about the prospects of other people's moral progress, you would cease to try to help, right? Like that despair leads to inaction or perhaps contrary action, and vice becomes this right there, right? So cynicism and despair lead naturally to vice. And the opposite of cynicism and despair is hope, right? So hope and faith in humanity, and again, in terms of moral progress, the possibility of moral progress, is what virtuous people do, and it leads to one's personal development in terms of virtue. One becomes more virtuous by having that hope and faith. So a different way of saying that is that it is self-fulfilling. When it comes to the self, if you have faith in your personal growth, you will grow more than if you lack that faith. And it's also self-fulfilling when it's directed towards others. If you have faith in the growth of humanity, you will treat them a particular way, right? Your tone will be nicer, your expectations will be better. I mean, self-fulfilling prophecy is all over the map if you've taken some psychology. So you know that self-fulfilling prophecy is a real phenomenon in the world. And if you expect things better of other people, they're much more likely to act accordingly. So treating people as though they are the better version of themselves does in fact facilitate their becoming the better version of themselves. So those are two like self-fulfilling kind of reasons for having faith in humanity and hope in the prospect of moral progress. But anyway, what is the content of this hope? Well, here are the three main claims that are part of the content. What is the hope? One is that no person is a lost cause. We can all improve morally. That's part of the content of the faith. To have faith in humanity is to say that there are no people that are lost cause, no individual, and especially no large groups, right? Racism is the belief that there's a particular race of people that are lost causes, right? Like they are just worthless and pointless, and there's no point in educating them and things like that. And we're all thankfully aware that racism is wrong. But here we can kind of see one of the main reasons why it's wrong. It fails to have hope in the particular people, and then also distorts what they really are, and so on. But faith in humanity is in some sense the opposite of racism, though it's broader than merely race. Of the rest of the content of faith in humanity, actually this is part of the content, but part of the result of faith in humanity is that it helps create a society in which it is easy to be good. Arguably, a moral obligation that people have is to create social institutions, dynamics, arrangements, and things like that, in which virtue is more easily attainable than vice. If you create a toxic work environment in which resentment, retaliation, and things like that are more common, people would more likely be, resentful and retaliate, and so vice will, uh, um, expand and take over much easily in an environment that is prone to, that is toxic. Whereas if you create a friendly, nice environment, like virtue would, flourish and grow. So part of faith in humanity, this hope for moral progress, leads to the creation of those institutions and social expectations that are conducive to personal growth. Again, faith in humanity applies to the self as well. So it's benevolent, it's helping others, it's trying to promote the virtue of others, but it's also a way to equip oneself with the tools to be the better version of oneself. If one despairs or is cynic towards the prospects of one's own moral development, one is not going to improve that much. But if one has hope that one can improve, then things will get better. That's at least one step in the right direction. So faith in humanity involves faith in one's own capacities for personal development. Okay, well, let's end here. We'll see you next time. Bye.